Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich begins to almost sound like the adult in the metaphorical room of Republicans. That either spells more bad news for the GOP or it heralds its new de facto leader, or both. In our third story in the countdown, Gingrich takes on boss Limbaugh, sort of, while another prominent conservative says it plainly. Quote, Rush is wrong, unquote. Appearing on Meet the Press, Mr. Gingrich found a description for anyone who wants the president to fail. One word, irrational.
This president has popularity, although the fact is his current approval rating is about the same as George W. Bush at the same point in 2001. 58% for a new president is very normal. Because, I mean, look, you got to want the president to succeed. You're irrational if you don't want the new president to succeed. Because if he doesn't succeed, the country doesn't succeed. So, I mean, that's not...
Do you think Republicans are discordant on that point about whether they want him to fail or succeed?
I don't think anyone should want the president of the United States to fail. I want some of his policies to be stopped. But I don't want the president of the United States to fail. I want him to learn new policies.
No, Mr. Gingrich obviously did not mention Limbaugh by name. It should be noted that thus far Gingrich has not issued any kind of apology, though boss Limbaugh did respond. More on that presently. But a former Bush speechwriter, David Frum, has called Limbaugh out by name in an upcoming Newsweek cover story entitled Why Rush is Wrong, after describing on the one side President Obama's appealing demeanor, quote, and for the leader of the Republicans, a man who is aggressive and bombastic, cutting and sarcastic, who dismisses the concerned citizens in network news focus groups as, quote, losers. But do the rest of us understand what we are doing to ourselves by accepting this leadership? Rush is to the Republicanism of the 2000s what Jesse Jackson was to the Democratic Party in the 1980s. He plays an important role in our coalition, and of course he and his supporters have to be treated with respect, but he cannot be allowed to be the public face of the enterprise. And while the progressive Democratic group Americans United for Change put up another TV ad tying boss Limbaugh to the Republicans, Michael Steele, GOP chair, continues to spin into the drain, telling the New York Times, quote, I'm trying to move an elephant that's become mired in its own muck. With that happy image in mind, let's turn to the editor of Huffington Post, Arianna Huffington. Thanks for your time tonight, Arianna.
Thank you, Keith.
Since Mr. Gingrich is ostensibly one who might actually run for president, let's take him first. Is he positioning himself as some sort of cooler, nicer, more rational Republican as an antidote to boss Limbaugh, and by extension, you know, the next de facto leader of the GOP?
Well, Gingrich understands, Keith, that there is a real void at the top of the Republican Party, and there are, in fact, kind of two sections in the Republican Party. Those who are groveling at Rush Limbaugh, who basically don't dare say anything with which he might disagree or take it back as soon as they say it. And the rest of them who realize, like Gingrich does, like David Frum does, that if the GOP continues to follow Rush Limbaugh, they're basically going to be out of power. This is the valley of death. You know, there is nothing there for them. So these are the two sections of the party. But unfortunately, Gingrich's ideas are not exactly new. You know, he wants to eliminate the capital gains tax, the estate tax, and reduce corporate taxes to 12.5%. I mean, these are the same kind of ideas that got us to the brink of disaster where we are at the moment.
And here's something even more frightening, Arianna. I think I agree with Limbaugh about Gingrich. He has now responded to Gingrich and said, I'm surprised by nothing when I'm dealing with people in the media who think they're in politics. He's obviously referring to Gingrich. They are fly-by-night operators, and most of them stand for nothing until they see a poll about what the American people want. Also, they're running TV ads against me. Newt Gingrich wishes they were running TV ads against him. Years ago, at a dinner in Washington, I made the mistake of saying to the man next to me, I totally disagree with Gingrich, but at least he believes in what he's saying. And the guy snorted. And he said, he didn't believe anything. He says what the focus groups tell him to say. If that's even slightly true in this case, and you have evidence from me and from boss Limbaugh about this, what does that say about Republicans' actual opinions of Limbaugh? Is Gingrich reading the tea leaves correctly?
Well, it depends on who is in your focus group. I mean, if you are focus group testing just the 20-something% of Americans who stuck to George Bush to the bitter end and who are the Rush Limbaugh ditto heads, then you get one certain perspective on the Republican Party. But remember, 20% of identified conservatives voted for Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. So if you look at that Republican Party, you get a very different answer. The bottom line, Keith, is that right now Bill Buckley must be turning in his grave, because the Republican Party right now is represented at the intellectual level by Rush Limbaugh, by Joe the Plumber, and by Sarah Palin, basically the drug addict, the accidental celebrity, and the woman who could see Russia from her porch.
Yeah, it's not a very high IQ total if you were to give it a sum. But here's a question that just occurs to me. This tension between these two parts of this party, is the party going to survive this? Are we going to come out at some point in perhaps the long-term future with two parties who wind up suing each other over the use of names like Republican or conservative?
Well, that will depend really on whether the so-called good part of the party, the sort of Gingrich, David Frum part of the party, comes up with some new ideas, because so far they haven't. And one of the problems I'm having with what David Frum wrote is that he's comparing Limbaugh to the Jesse Jackson of the 1980s. Well, I went back and reread Jackson's speech at the '88 convention, and really, it's an incredibly good speech. He issued a moral challenge to America. It was very prescient, talking about how the greedy even do not benefit long from the greed. He talked about the people who need to take care of, the people who get up in the morning, take the early buses, he put it, and go to work in hospitals and hotels, making up the beds we slept in at night. God, have you ever heard anything from Rush Limbaugh that invoked empathy or compassion?
For himself, to paraphrase Senator Benson, I know Jesse Jackson, and Rush Limbaugh, you're no Jesse Jackson. Arianna Huffington, founder and editor of HuffingtonPost.com, as always. Great, thanks for your time, Arianna.
Thank you, Keith.